Hello everyone and welcome to my McGinnis guide. We're going to be going through everything there is to know about McGinnis, focusing mostly on beginner aspects, talking about her abilities, talking about her chain gun, what you should be doing in each phase of the game. We're not going to be focusing on any builds or anything like that. I'll be mentioning some items, of course, but I don't want to go too deep into specific items because Deadlock is changing just so often these days that it would be in my opinion, a complete waste of time and we wouldn't have any longevity to the guide at all. So we're going to be focusing mostly on just simple tips and tricks for using the different abilities that McGinnis has. If you are looking for a build guide, we'll probably be putting one up here in a couple days, going over the Gun Guinness build that is currently the top rated build. That is my build in Deadlock. So if you guys are wanting a gun focused build, then that is always a good one that you can go with, and that's going to be what you're seeing in all of this background footage here, me using that specific build. But all of that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, yada yada yada, all that YouTuber stuff, right? It helps me out. Leave a comment below about what kind of stuff that you guys want to see for Deadlock in the future, different guides or different builds for McGinnis or other characters. Let me know. And without anything else, guys, let's jump into the video. McGinnis is typically classified as an anti-dive support-ish, not like a full support, like a little bit less than like a dynamo or something like that, but she has some support abilities, especially with her heal and her wall. And most importantly, she is definitely a split pusher above all. So if you enjoy split pushing, you're going to enjoy playing McGinnis. I know a lot of people out there don't like split pushing. A lot of people don't like that style of play, which is totally fair, but it is something that McGinnis certainly excels at, and it's a core part of her kit. So it's something that you're going to want to do at least a little bit when playing as her. Now, on top of that, McGinnis has a couple big downsides and a couple big upsides as well. Number one, she is very slow. She has low base movement speed, and on top of that has just 2 stamina base, which makes her very, very easy to run down. This is a big reason why you're going to want to pick up something like extra stamina very early on into the game. You're not going to want to be playing through an entire match of Deadlock with 2 stamina. You will just get absolutely destroyed. Characters like Warden are just going to cage you, and you're not going to be able to get away from them at all, and you're going to get ran down. So make sure to pick up stuff like extra stamina pretty early on if you don't want that to happen to you. On top of that, she gets a nice upside where she has an innate 25% spirit armor, which is absolutely monstrous. Most characters don't have anything close to this. This is effectively like having spirit armor for free, the entire $1,200 item. So this is huge, to say the least, and she gets this from the start of the game, which is going to make laning against characters like Infernus or Grey Talon an absolute breeze. And she doesn't even lose any bullet resist to get that. So McGinnis overall in lane is a very, very good character. She can be an absolute lane bully, so always try to take advantage of that and take good poke fights, right, with her, because she almost always will come out on top with that between her innate resistance and, of course, her heal.
Now, McGinnis' gun, like most Deadlock characters, is essentially an ability all on its own. And her gun is actually pretty unique even in the context of Deadlock. It's got really low damage per shot, but has a high rate of fire and an absolutely massive magazine, meaning it has the highest DPS of any gun at level 1, or starting at the beginning of the game, I suppose, of any character in the game, at least at the time of this video. However, guys, it has a 2-second charge up time to reach its max fire rate, and no amount of increased fire rate is ever going to change this. You're just stuck with it. Items like Fleetfoot or Heroic Aura are good for running down enemies once your gun has reached its max rate of fire, though, so consider picking those up if you do want to go a gun route. Additionally, the really big magazine capacity and high rate of fire means that items that increase your magazine size will be huge for McGinnis, and items that have on-hit effects like Siphon Bullets, Tesla Bullets, Lucky Shot, Inhibitor, so on and so forth are also especially good. And because, again, her gun DPS is so high, you can invest pretty minimally in gun items and still put out a lot of DPS, or you can invest really heavily and pick up things like Titanic Magazine and be a walking bullet hose. McGinnis' first ability is probably her most iconic, her turret. These little bastards are a thorn in everybody's side, and they're very fun to use, even though that they have some pretty serious drawbacks. Now, turrets have very low spirit scaling, which means that just building items like Boundless Spirit or getting raw spirit items and things like that really don't increase her damage that much. It's just I think it's like 0.4% spirit scaling or something like that in turrets, which when translated is just not that much. You're much better off if you want to increase the DPS of your turrets by getting the tier 3 talent, which you're probably going to get if you're building for turrets anyway, or building things like rapid recharge, improved cooldown, escalating exposure, mystic vuln, mystic slow, stuff like that. Things that are kind of going to indirectly increase the DPS rather than just increase it as direct raw DPS, right? There's some other things to note about McGinnis's turrets. Whoever you shoot at with your chain gun, your turrets will try to focus. This can be really sketchy if you're changing targets very often, because you do not want to, split from target to target and have your turrets constantly moving, because they rotate fairly slowly. They have about a 1 second deploy time, so after it lands on the ground, after about 1 second or so, it'll start shooting, which can be nice. It used to be a lot longer and it was much worse. So that is a lot quicker now, but they still rotate very, very slowly. So you want to be careful about where you position them. They're very easy to kill. On the topic of them getting killed and them getting destroyed, they do drop souls whenever they die, which means you need to be careful in lane, especially when throwing them down. If you spam them too much, you're going to be feeding souls to your opponents, which is just obviously not a good idea. You don't want your opponents to be getting ahead or, catching up to you just because you decide to spam a bunch of turrets all the time. Not a good look, not something that you want. Now, turrets also scale off of McGinnis's health. I believe it's 30%, and they have 60% spirit resist on top of that. So any character that's going to be doing spirit damage is going to have a hard time dealing with this. Again, characters like Grey Talon, even Paradox to a lesser extent, depending on the Paradox build. Just very spirit-heavy characters. Viscous is another one that typically kind of struggles at dealing with McGinnis turrets. Things like that. And then, of course, building raw health items is a good way to increase, your turret's health, because it scales off of your own health. So you make yourself more tanky, you make your turrets more tanky. Now you're harder to kill while your turrets are harder to kill, so they have to choose between the two. So it's a good way of increasing the DPS overall of McGinnis's turrets. So even if you're going for like a more turret-centric build, think about picking up items like Fortitude, because it will make your turrets that much more effective. Your turret build isn't going to do a whole lot if your turrets just instantly die anytime someone sneezes on them. So always keep that in mind. Turrets have a 30-second uptime, which means they're great for team fights. Team fights in Deadlock really don't go for that long, so you're typically going to be just fine being able to drop your turret and let it shoot. And if the fight goes on for longer than 30 seconds, you're probably going to have more turrets up. And if you don't, you can always disengage, or the fight went really weird or something like that. So 30 seconds is more or less fine. 30 seconds is also long enough for them to farm souls for you while you go and do something else. So you can always drop it in a lane, let the turrets kind of gun down some minions, get you some farm even while you're not there. Or be a early warning system for ganks. So if you see a lash nearby or you see a lash in an adjacent lane, you can always, drop those turrets in between the lanes and use it as an early warning, so you don't end up getting ganked by that lash or by that Yamato or whoever it might be. Now, McGinnis' second ability is probably her simplest and most straightforward. It's her heal. There's not a lot to say about this ability. It's got a pretty long cooldown. It lasts for, I think, 6 seconds base, and it's got decent healing. It's not a lot, and you have to stand in the AoE for it, which makes it not as nearly as effective as something like Dynamo's heal. But at the end of the day, it does heal you a little bit, and it is fine. The best thing that the heal is actually good for is the tier 1 talent that gives you 35% increased rate of fire while standing inside of it. And this will actually apply to anyone standing inside of it, at least for your allies, which is a great way to increase your DPS, especially when pushing objectives. This is what makes McGinnis a very effective split pusher, because she will be able to absolutely shred objectives if given the opportunity. So if your whole team is pushing an objective down, don't be afraid to call out that you're dropping your heal and let your team get that nice 35% boost. You can always drop a point into this. It's a very low opportunity cost for a pretty big upside. So it's something that I like to get a point in pretty quickly after I've either maxed my turrets or maxed my wall. Now, speaking of wall, we get to, in my opinion, McGinnis' strongest ability, and possibly one of the strongest abilities in all of Deadlock when utilized correctly. As McGinnis likes to say, if you use this well, your team will love you, and if you use it poorly, your team will hate you.
and it won't matter because you'll probably be dead anyway. And that's very true. The turret is a great thing to get your team killed with, and it's a great thing to absolutely destroy the enemy team. Now, tier 1 on the turret, or excuse me, on the wall is one of the best abilities in the game. It's absolutely crazy. I think it's the first unlock you should always be getting on McGinnis, because amplifying your damage by 25% against enemies is absolutely insane in lane, especially when you combo this with a heavy melee. There's an entire build dedicated to this exact mechanic where you drop a wall on somebody and heavy melee them for like 800 damage and they instantly explode. It's very, very powerful. On top of that, once you get to level 3, you get an on-demand stun, which is something that is fairly rare in Deadlock. Many stuns in Deadlock are actually delayed stuns or aren't instantaneous or require you to be very close, like Mo and Krill Ultimate or something like that. Or they have a charge up like Infernus ult, stuff like that. While McGinnis's is actually fairly on demand, which makes it a very powerful ability for stopping, Haze ultimates or Dynamo ultimates or 7 ultimates or any other ultimate that you can possibly think of. It's a very, very effective disruption tool. It's a very, very effective pick tool to lock down enemies and knock them out of their different abilities. So definitely something that you're going to want to learn how to use effectively, and it is going to be one of your most powerful abilities and one of the most abusable abilities in Deadlock. So learn how to use this ability, learn how to love this ability, because it is absolutely insane. Onto our final ability, our ultimate ability, Spectral Artillery or Spectral Barrage or whatever the hell it's called. McGinnis will basically start firing a shitload of missiles at range, and they do a lot of damage. However, they are very clunky to aim a lot of the time. If someone's in an open area, it is absolutely devastating because of the amount of DPS it does. However, a lot of the times, it's just kind of an awkward ability to hit people with. It also has a minimum range on it, so you won't be able to hit people who are right on top of you. However, if you look straight up while firing, it can be very effective and it can land directly on top of you. However, you won't be able to really see. So it's a little bit of a tricky ability to use. It's a very easy ability to dodge a lot of the time, but you can use it to absolutely devastating effect a lot of the time once you kind of get used to using it. I personally use it a lot to poke enemies in lane, especially when you first unlock it. If you can get a good wall on somebody and wall them off, you can just drop this ult and then just hammer away at them with that 25% damage boost on them and normally secure yourself maybe a kill or even 2 if the other player tries to help out their caught teammate. So overall, this ability is very high DPS, but a very clunky ability to use. So it's something that I typically use when all my other abilities are on cooldown, or maybe if the enemy is trying to retreat, or if we're sieging a objective like the walkers or a base or something like that, and I can have the high ground, then it's typically a very powerful ability. But if you're just on the ground, you end up moving really slowly and the enemy team can jump on you very quickly. So always try to be very aware of your positioning. Now, one other small trick that you can do with this that we'll talk about again later is that the ultimate ability, because of the amount of damage it does, is very effective at taking out the tier 3 camps. So right as the 10 minutes in the game hits and those tier 3 camps spawn, definitely consider going to one of those camps, dropping a turret, your heal, and a wall, and then ulting the camp. You'll be able to clean it up very quickly and net yourself a nice 600-ish souls for very little effort. And while, yeah, you're using your ultimate ability, it's just not that big of a deal, and it has a low enough cooldown that you're probably not going to need it as you go and farm up, and it's not that big of a deal. So definitely consider doing that. It's a big part of why McGinnis is powerful, and it can definitely help you snowball in the mid game. Now that we know all of McGinnis' abilities and some general tips and ideas about them, let's talk about using them in game. Now remember, we're not going to be talking about any builds. We may mention some items and things like that, but generally speaking, we're going to be pretty build agnostic for this video. Now, when you get to lane, one thing that you're always going to want to do, regardless of what build you plan on going through, is wall your minions. You're almost always going to want to start with wall, just so you can either wall your minions, and on top of that wall is just a crazy ability like we talked about before. You're just going to drop your spectral wall in front of your minions as they're landing, which is going to prevent them from moving forward. The reason that we do this is going to make the enemy minions move up forward. It's going to allow you to stay under your tower and be a little bit more safe, especially against characters that want to pull you out of position, like Bebop or things like that. It's also going to give you a better position to be able to clear out the enemy wave, which is going to let you secure those souls a lot easier than your opponents are going to be able to against your minions, and then you're going to be able to focus on last hitting your enemy's minions out and taking their souls. So overall, it's very, very effective to wall your minions off at the beginning, and by the time that second wave arrives, your wall is going to be off cooldown, and you're going to be able to, again, either wall your own minions off or wall your opponent's minions off to secure last hits. Now, you're always going to want to be using your wall, spamming your wall in lane. I always put my first 3 points for my abilities into wall because it is simply that good of an ability. You're going to want to try to get those heavy melees off on people after you hit them with the wall, because that 25% damage amp is going to skyrocket the damage of your wall, and they're going to panic, and you're going to be able to absolutely destroy them before they're able to really get away. Or at worst, they're going to be able to get away under their tower and then be low, and you're going to be able to bully them out of the game. So definitely make sure to harass and secure last hits with your wall, secure kills, so on and so forth. Now, one important note that a lot of people kind of make this mistake in lane phase with McGinnis is they use a lot of turrets. You do not want to be using your turrets in lane, and if you do use them, you want to be putting them around corners and places that the enemy isn't going to be able to just shoot them. Remember, turrets drop souls when they die, which means if you just sit there and keep spamming turrets and your opponent keeps killing them, you're basically just feeding them souls and giving them an advantage over you, or allowing them to catch up to you if you were already ahead. So do not constantly place turrets in lane. I typically don't even pick up things like extra charge until I'm out of lane phase, just because having those multiple turrets just ends up feeding a lot of souls to your opponents, and it's really, really not worth it. Turrets just don't do a lot of damage early on. They're best used to act as kind of early warning systems against ganks. So if you have like a lash in an adjacent lane, you can kind of toss a turret around there to give yourself a little bit of a warning if he decides to push towards you, or using them as anti-dive, putting them around corners and things like that, to where if your opponents do decide to dive you, they'll be getting chunked by your turrets and slowed by your turrets and things like that. But overall, you do not want to be using them aggressively in any way. It's just going to end up feeding a lot of souls to your opponents, allowing them to catch up to you. One last thing with McGinnis in your lane phase is, number one, be very careful with ganks, both you ganking and your opponent's ganking. Like I mentioned before, McGinnis only starts with 2 stamina, which makes her very, very easy to gank because she is so slow at getting away from those ganks. So if you have a lash or a warden or something like that in an adjacent lane, be very, very aware of them possibly coming over and locking you down, because it's very easy for them to do so and kill you. At the same time, McGinnis isn't the best ganker, but the wall can be a very effective tool for dropping in and at least relieving some pressure, if not outright getting a kill or something like that on some enemies. So while I don't think that, you know, you want to be ganking with McGinnis in the same way that you might with a character like Lash or Yamato, you still can do a little bit of damage, or at least relieve some pressure off your allies by utilizing that wall. Now, McGinnis's big advantage in the mid game is the fact that she is so effective at giving your team numbers, either through getting picks with the wall or by forcing the enemy team to rotate 2 or more players to you when you're split pushing. Like I mentioned before, McGinnis is a great split pusher, and while that is a very effective way to play the character, that isn't the only way that you necessarily have to. She's very good at getting picks with the wall. You can find isolated enemies and very quickly burn them down and allow your team numbers advantage to either snowball that or secure objectives like walkers or the urn. You should be split pushing at least a little bit per game, or at least, you know, try to, if you see an opportunity to do so, maybe take advantage of it. It doesn't need to be the focus of your gameplay, but it's good to do it at least a little bit, because McGinnis especially really wants flex slots. No matter what build you're typically going, she doesn't typically fill out all of her items as effectively as other characters might, so she's definitely going to want to get those flex slots online as soon as possible. Another thing is, don't be afraid, this kind of goes with it, don't be afraid to take 1v1 fights. McGinnis is very strong in the mid game. The chain gun can spit out some serious DPS, even with only minimal investment, like a basic magazine, into the gun. So it is absolutely a good idea for you to take 1v1 fights. Try to engage with enemies, as long as it's not someone who is exceptionally good at 1v1ing, like a Lash or something like that. Take those fights, win those fights, because it is such a powerful thing to be able to do, to be able to get those numbers advantages and start pushing down objectives. And finally, guys,
The other major thing that you should be doing at this time, especially once camps start coming up around the 10-minute mark, is get those tier 3 camps, those really big camps. Very few characters in the game can solo those camps at level, or at 10 minutes. Sorry, there's no level. Can solo those camps at 10 minutes into the game. So take advantage of the fact that McGinnis absolutely can drop a turret, drop your heal, drop your wall, and then ult the camp, and you'll secure yourself a nice boost of souls. I think it's like 600 or something like that at 10 minutes, which is a huge boost. It really can put you ahead and let you snowball through the mid game. This is one of the big strengths of McGinnis. It helps her in the mid game and allows her to either reach her late game potential with turrets or snowball objectives and things like that to kind of act as this, third core or kind of support-ish type character. Now, in late game, your tactics aren't going to change a ton. However, you want to be a little bit more passive and a little bit smarter about who you're directly 1v1ing or engaging in team fights. You don't ever want to get caught out by a character like Infernus or Wraith or something like that, because those characters are just going to absolutely blow you up. You want to make sure that you're playing a little bit further back than you might in the early or mid game, simply because, again, McGinnis is very slow, and once you get into the late game stages where people are having superior stamina, and much higher move speeds like Boundless Spirit and things like that, where they're just flying around the map, it's very easy for McGinnis to get ran down. But you're still going to be looking for big picks with your wall, shutting people down, especially when team fights are beginning and ending. You can always initiate with your wall and get a big pick. You can always end fights and finish people off by walling them as they try to escape. McGinnis is, of course, very, very effective at that. Another big thing with McGinnis in the late game is that she is very effective in the Rejuvenator pit. McGinnis is fantastic at stealing the Rejuvenator from the enemy team. The wall is fantastic at walling the enemy off from the Rejuvenator as it descends, or stunning them as they go to try to get their heavy melee off. So you should always be looking to contest that. It can be a dangerous thing to do, but once you really get it down, you can just swing games and turn games on their head just because of how powerful McGinnis is at doing that. Like you can see here, this team was not paying any attention at all, and I was able to steal the Rejuvenator easy peasy. That's something that, if a McGinnis on the other team, you want to be paying attention to that. And certainly if you're if you're playing McGinnis, then it's something to consider as well. And if you're the team that is doing the Rejuvenator, it's something that you can easily hold because of that stun and because of that wall. It's a great zoning tool for being able to secure the Rejuvenator for your own team and not let it get stolen. And then finally, guys, McGinnis in the late game is very good at sieging and defending the bases. Because of how these bases are designed and how they kind of funnel people into these positions, McGinnis is very effective at holding and attacking the enemy positions. When you're in the enemy base, always make sure you're dropping turrets all over the place. Same for your base, of course. If you know the enemy team is going to start a big siege of your base, put some preemptive turrets down. If you think that the enemy is going to be making an all-in push to try to end the game on your patron when it's in a weakened state, drop a bunch of those turrets into the corners of that pit. A lot of players won't notice it at all, and you will be able to do absolutely monstrous amounts of damage on them, and possibly even be able to clean them up before they're able to end the game. So always keep that in mind. Don't just be standing around whenever the bases are being sieged, waiting for things to happen or waiting for an initiation. Make sure you're just dropping those turrets all over the place and kind of being ready for that, those all-in pushes to happen. That's it, guys. I hope I touched on most important things when it comes to McGinnis. Again, this is a very basic overview. If you're looking for a specific build, I have builds that you can look up in-game. The McGinnis build, I highly recommend, obviously. It's what I use in-game, and it's what you guys have been seeing here in this background footage. And maybe we'll do more guides in the future. Let me know in the comments below anything that you guys might not still understand about McGinnis, or anything that I might have missed. To leave a comment, a tip, a trick, or something like that. Let's get this knowledge out there for everybody's favorite engineer girl. Love to hear your guys' thoughts down below as always. Like and subscribe, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.